Close your eyes and forget the glow of LEDs, the constant hum of electricity, and the smooth asphalt you walk on every day. Imagine that time is a curtain of coal smoke we are about to pass through. The year is 1875. Washington, D.C. is not the crystalline metropolis you know. It is a swamp of contradictions, where marble mansions and wooden shanties vie for space on streets covered in mud and manure. Today, you are not just an observer. You will inhabit the skin, the sweat, and the fears of the Harrison family. You will feel the constriction of the corset, the weight of the top hat, and the dread of an invisible infection. Prepare yourself, for the progress of 1875 has a strong smell, a rough texture, and a cost that official history rarely dares to tell. It is 5:30 in the morning, and the darkness inside the mansion on Lafayette Square is something modern man has unlearned to see. It is an absolute, dense, almost tactile blackness that swallows any trace of light. The silence is suddenly broken, not by a technological sound, but by the metallic clang coming from the bowels of the house. In the basement, the stoker, a man whose lungs are already permanently stained gray from constant soot inhalation, shovels anthracite coal directly into the infrared furnace. It is the heart of the mansion beginning to beat, sending a subtle vibration that travels up through the massive oak beams, across the pine floors, and through the plaster walls, to the master bedroom, where Mr. Arthur Harrison awakens. He does not open his eyes to a warm environment. He awakens under the Herculean weight of 4 layers of wool blankets, woven with a density that seems to immobilize the body of an adult man against the goose feather mattress. The air he breathes is still and frigid, laden with the residual smell of burnt kerosene from the wall lamps that were left on at a minimal flame to ward off nocturnal rats and insects. There is also the dry, musty odor of the heavy velvet curtains. These curtains, weighing pounds per square yard, are never fully opened. For in 1885, popular medical science faithfully believes in the miasma theory, the idea that night air carries poisonous vapors and particles of organic decomposition that can rot the lungs and blood during sleep, causing diseases like cholera and typhoid fever. Arthur observes the ornate plaster ceiling, where the shadows of trees projected by the moonlight create ghostly shapes on the acanthus leaf moldings. He hears the footsteps of Samuel, the house servant, approaching with the mechanical precision of a pendulum clock. Samuel enters without knocking, a ghost in white cotton gloves, carrying a Limoges porcelain pitcher containing 5 liters of water that has just reached boiling point on the basement stove. Steam rises in aggressive white columns that battle the frigid gloom of the room, bringing with it a humid warmth that is the only luxury of that morning. Arthur rises and feels the brutal thermal shock of the oak floor against the soles of his bare feet. He approaches the marble basin and begins the ritual of shaving, a task that demands the concentration of a surgeon. The Sheffield steel razor, a piece of British craftsmanship, is passed slowly and rhythmically over a cowhide strop fixed to the side of the mahogany dresser. The sound vaptees, the metronome of 19th century masculine routine, a sound that echoes both precision and danger. He stretches the skin of his neck with fingers trembling from the cold, feeling the blade's edge scrape against the dry, coarse hairs. In an era without modern antibiotics or antiseptics, each shave is a silent gamble with mortality. A small, deep cut, infected by a blade cleaned only with a used cloth, could be the gateway to erysipelas or a systemic infection that would kill a senator in less than a week. He wipes away the white lather, made from saponified pork fat and lavender essence, using a rough linen cloth that exfoliates his already irritated skin until it is raw, a small daily sacrifice in the name of decency and social presentation. Meanwhile, in the adjacent room, his wife, Elizabeth Harrison, wages her own mechanical battle against human biology and social impositions. Mary, her lady's maid, a young woman whose joints already show signs of early rheumatism from heavy, repetitive work, has already laid out the infinite layers of clothing on the velvet divan. Elizabeth first dons the chemise, a simple cotton tunic that serves as the only absorbent barrier between her skin and the rigid structure that will follow. Secure. Then, the whalebone corset is positioned like a siege armor. Mary holds the silk cords, and Elizabeth firmly grips the wooden columns of the 4-poster bed to avoid being pulled down by the applied force. The maid braces her foot against the bed's base and pulls the laces with brutal strength, ignoring her mistress's groans of pain. The sound is that of cello strings being stretched to the critical point of rupture. Elizabeth exhales all the oxygen from her lungs, feeling her lower ribs physically curve inward and her internal organs, liver, stomach, and intestines be displaced downward, compressing her diaphragm and bladder. The S silhouette is not merely an aesthetic choice. It is a cruel social demand that imposes short, shallow, and purely thoracic breathing. Elizabeth feels the familiar dizziness, the onset of cerebral hypoxia that Victorian society romantically labeled as the vapors or female fragility, when in reality it was merely the result of a systemic crushing of the ribcage. Over this torture structure follow the linen petticoats, starched with cornstarch until they are stiff as cardboard. the bustle made of a wire and horsehair cage to project the hips and give volume to the back of the dress. And finally, the reception gown of burgundy silk, which, alone, weighs an impressive 12 kilograms. Every movement Elizabeth makes generates the frou-frou, a dry, metallic, and imposing sound of pure silk rustling against the lower layers of rigid fabric. For Elizabeth, being dressed for the day is to be imprisoned in a monument of Victorian fabric and engineering, unable to run, to bend, or to breathe fully until bedtime, when the maid will release her from her confinement. At 7:30, the family gathers in the dining room, an environment that resembles a mausoleum of opulence. The Washington sun, always pale and filtered by the smoke from external chimneys, is merely an unwelcome guest. The true, yellow light comes from the gas jets that emit a constant hiss, a serpentine sound indicating that the coal gas fuel is being consumed. This artificial illumination creates deep shadows and makes faces appear sickly and waxy. Breakfast is a marathon of saturated fat and heavy proteins, necessary to maintain body heat in a house without efficient central heating. The menu consists of liver steaks fried in thick lard, pickled oysters brought in barrels from Chesapeake Bay, eggs whose yolks have been cooked to an exhausted gray color, and cornbreads of such density that they require slow and deliberate chewing. The coffee is a dark, bitter potion, often adulterated with ground chicory roots to reduce import costs. Silence is the golden rule at the table, an absolute silence that is only broken by the clinking of heavy silver against Limoges porcelain. Arthur opens his copy of the National Intelligencer, smelling the strong, lead-rich, fresh
coal
ink,
dust,
while Elizabeth observes a particle of coal dust that, despite all the efforts of the waiting servants, has already begun to silently settle on the butter sculpted in the shape of a swan. They eat with the composure of statues, but beneath the starched clothes, the sweat from the effort of dressing and the pain of compressed ribs remind them that in 1875, human dignity is a daily triumph over constant physical discomfort. The morning has barely begun, and the weight of civilization already feels suffocating on their shoulders. The kitchen in the basement, meanwhile, is an inferno of activity and heat. The Eagle cast-iron stove, a metal beast with 6 burners and 2 ovens, glows a dull red, radiating a heat that makes the air vibrate. The cook, a robust woman of Irish descent, with arms stained with flour and soot, removes hand-kneaded breads from one of the ovens, the smell of yeast and toasted wheat battling the odor of coal. Beside her, an assistant chips away at blocks of ice brought from Maine, wrapped in sawdust to resist melting. Ice is a luxury, used to keep butter firm and milk fresh in a city that, in summer, melts the asphalt off the streets. The hierarchy in the kitchen is as rigid as that in the dining room. The cook commands with a glance, and the assistants move in a silent ballet of copper pots and wicker baskets. The dumbwaiter, a manual freight elevator, goes up and down with the dishes, each carefully covered to prevent cooling. The servants' lives are an existence of hard work and invisibility, where the comfort of the masters is the only metric of success. They live in cramped rooms, in the attic or in alleys behind the mansion, in conditions that brutally contrast with the luxury they serve. Their days begin before sunrise and end long after their employers are asleep, an endless cycle of service and sacrifice. The education of elite children in 1875 is a separate chapter. Clara Harrison, the 19-year-old daughter, is already in her room, studying botany and French literature. Her governess, a middle-aged English lady, supervises her studies.
It looks right to me. No, it does not.
Female
The spacing is
education of
uneven.
the era
Try again,
focuses on
neatly.
domestic
Yes,
arts, languages, and general culture, preparing them to be competent wives and mothers, but rarely for a professional career. Clara reads a Jane Austen novel, smelling the aged paper and faded ink. Her childhood toys, porcelain dolls, and a small wooden piano are still stored in a closet, reminding her of a childhood that, though privileged, was full of rules and expectations. Boys, on the other hand, attend rigorous preparatory schools, where they learn Latin, Greek, and mathematics, preparing for elite universities and careers in law, politics, or business. The pressure on the new generation is immense. They are the heirs of an empire under construction, and failure is not an option. Childhood, in 1875, even for the wealthy, is a period of discipline and preparation, where spontaneity is often sacrificed in the name of character formation. Mr. Arthur Harrison, after breakfast, retires to his study. The environment is dark wood and leather, with bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. He lights a Cuban cigar, the strong smell of tobacco mingling with the odor of old books and beeswax. He sits at his desk where maps of the American West are spread open, showing proposed routes for new railroads. In 1875, westward expansion is the nation's great adventure, and Arthur is deeply involved in the legal and financial aspects of this undertaking. He writes letters with a quill pen, the iron gull ink slowly flowing onto the cotton paper. Every word is carefully chosen. Every sentence is a negotiation. The predominant sound is the scratching of the pen on paper and the ticking of the pendulum clock on the wall, marking the time of a world that moves at a much slower pace than ours. He reviews legal documents, land contracts, and engineering reports, each a brick in the construction of America's future. Politics and business are intrinsically linked, and Arthur is a master at navigating these murky waters, where a man's fortune can be made or unmade with a single handshake or a misplaced word. Understood, Fernando. Here is part 2 of the script, translated into English, focusing on urban life, the chaos of the streets, and the challenges of Washington, D.C. in 1875, maintaining the same level of detail and volume. At 9:15 in the morning, Mr. Arthur Harrison dons his silk top hat, an accessory that rests upon his head, not merely as headwear, but as a physical and symbolic reminder of his position in Washington's social and political hierarchy. Samuel, the servant, opens the heavy, solid oak doors, and the world of 1875 invades Arthur's lungs with the force of a punch. Washington, D.C. is not a city of white monuments and perfectly manicured lawns. It is a colossal, noisy, dangerously unsanitary construction site, constantly transforming. The moment Arthur steps onto the red brick sidewalk of Pennsylvania Avenue, he is assailed by a symphony of metallic and organic noises. The predominant sound is that of iron wheels, violently clattering against uneven paving stones. There is no rubber to cushion the impact. It is the dry shock of metal on stone that makes shop windows vibrate, the teeth of carriage passengers ache, and the ground tremble beneath one's feet. The city's smell is a living, complex, and overwhelming entity. In 1875, Washington is powered by animal traction, and this means that 40,000 horses deposit tons of manure on the streets every day. Under the May sun, this organic material dries quickly, transforming into a fine, brown dust that the wind whips up and deposits on everything. On the fruits in the street vendors' stalls, on gentlemen's mustaches, on ladies' dresses, and, inevitably, deep within the lungs of every citizen. When it rains, the city transforms into a swamp of black, viscous mud that reaches the knees, making crossing the streets a perilous adventure. Arthur observes the crossing sweepers, orphaned boys dressed in rags, who, for a copper penny, use straw brooms to clear a path through the mud and excrement so that the wealthy can cross the street without ruining their polished calfskin boots. Social inequality in 1875 is not an abstract statistic. It is a physical barrier made of mud and feces that you must pay to traverse, a constant reminder of the divide between the haves and the have-not. Arthur walks towards the Willard Hotel, the epicenter of real power in Washington, where the most important deals are sealed. The path is a sensory and moral battlefield. On one side, he sees the new government buildings rising, white marble columns being erected by rudimentary wooden cranes, powered by ropes and pulleys, a symbol of national ambition. On the other, he sees Murder Bay, one of the city's most dangerous and unsanitary slums, where former slaves and Irish immigrants live in rotting wooden shacks, surrounded by open sewers that exude a putrid smell that battles against a lavender perfume Arthur carries in his handkerchief. The germ theory is still an academic discussion. For the common citizen, the danger lies in the bad air, the miasma that rises from these sewers. Arthur quickens his pace, passing Civil War veterans, men in their 30s who look 60, with wooden legs and bayonet scars, sitting on the steps of departments, begging for an audience that will never come. These men, once heroes, are now forgotten casualties of a war that ended just a decade prior, their sacrifices overshadowed by the city's relentless pursuit of progress and wealth. Inside the Willard Hotel, the atmosphere is saturated by a perpetual cloud of Cuban cigar smoke. The ceiling is yellowed by nicotine, and the floor is dotted with brass spittoons that rarely hit their mark. Arthur finds Senator Miller to discuss the financing of the Transcontinental Railroad. In 1875, corruption is not conducted through invisible bank transfers. It is done in whispers, with envelopes of physical cash exchanged under heavy oak tables, accompanied by generous pours of cheap bourbon that burn the throat. In the center of the room, the telegraph machine emits a frantic clatter-thee sound of information, traveling at the speed of light through copper wires. It is the internet of the era, and every dot and dash can mean the ruin of a fortune or the birth of an empire. Arthur feels the power vibrating in that small brass machine. It is technology conquering distance, yet still tethered to a world where most of the population cannot even read. The telegraph operator, a young man with ink-stained fingers, works tirelessly, translating the clicks into words that shape the nation's destiny. Meanwhile, Elizabeth and Clara begin the ritual of courtesy calls, the paper social network of the 19th century. They ascend into their luxurious carriage, a vehicle that costs the equivalent of 10 years' wages for a laborer. The interior is padded velvet, but no suspension can fully protect Elizabeth from the impact of every pothole in the street. They carry sandalwood boxes containing their calling cards. The rule is rigid. If the upper right corner is folded, the visit was personal. If the lower corner is folded, it is a farewell. It is a social chess game where the objective is to be seen by the right eyes without ever appearing desperate. They stop before the mansion of Mrs. Fish, the wife of the Secretary of State. Elizabeth observes through her lace parasol the other carriages, She notes who is wearing lion silk and who has had to alter last year's dress. Status is an armor that requires daily maintenance, and in Washington, a woman without calling cards is a social ghost. The unspoken rules of this social ballet are more complex than any legal code, dictating everything from the length of a visit to the precise wording of an invitation. The carriage stops in front of one of the new department stores on F Street, a temple of consumption that rivals the grand emporiums of New York. The interior is a labyrinth of fabrics, perfumes, and imported trinkets. The smell is an intoxicating blend of Egyptian cotton, Scottish wool, floralia, and the chemical odors of synthetic dyes that are beginning to replace natural pigments. Elizabeth and Clara move among the dark wooden shelves, observing hats adorned with exotic bird feathers and hand-painted silk fans. For Clara, it is a glimpse into a future where fashion is more accessible and varied. But for Elizabeth, it is a constant reminder of the need to maintain appearances and to consume to affirm her position. She purchases a new pair of silk gloves, an essential item that should never be removed in public except to eat. The saleswoman, a young German immigrant, can barely hide the exhaustion in her eyes, working 12 hours a day for a wage that barely covers the rent for her cramped room in an overcrowded tenement. With each purchase, Elizabeth is not just acquiring a product. She is participating in a complex global economy, where the luxury of some is built upon the hard and often invisible labor of others.
The noise never stops,
On the way back
does it?
home, the carriage passes through the National Mall, but the sight is shocking to modern eyes.
It's relentless.
In 1875, the Washington Monument is a melancholic and bizarre vision. It stands stagnant, only one-third of its final height, resembling a giant abandoned chimney, a gray stone stump against the sky. Construction ceased years ago due to lack of funds and the turmoil of the Civil War. Around the base of the unfinished monument, cows, grays, and veteran soldiers, some without arms or legs, sit on makeshift wooden benches, telling stories of Gettysburg and Antietam to anyone who will listen. For the Harrison family, this stone stump is a symbol of a nation that still doesn't know if it will fully rebuild itself, a visible scar in the heart of the capital. The mall is not a park. It is a wasteland, a cattle pasture where grass grows wild and dust accumulates. The site is a constant reminder that, despite the luxury of mansions and the ambition of politicians, the wound of war is still open and visible in the urban landscape. As the afternoon progresses, Washington's heat begins to intensify, bringing with it the famous swamp humidity. Mr. Harrison, in his office, feels the sweat beneath his starched collar, which begins to irritate his skin. There are no electric fans, only the hope of a breeze passing through the open windows, which carry with them the constant sound of hammers and saws. Washington in 1875 is a perpetual construction site, a city desperately trying to become worthy of being the capital of a rising world power. He receives an urgent telegram. The sound of the Morse machine in the next room is a nervous click-click, the pulse of the era of instant information. The telegram brings news from St. Louis. More arrests have been made in the whiskey ring scandal, a corruption scheme involving President Ulysses S. Grant's closest aides. For Arthur, it is a reminder that power in Washington is a dangerous game, where loyalty is volatile and reputation can be destroyed in a matter of hours. He knows that President Grant, a war hero whose boots trod the mud of crucial battles, is now surrounded by wolves in tailored suits. And each day, the web of corruption tightens further. Late in the afternoon, Elizabeth feels the inevitable headache caused by the tight corset and the constant noise of the city. She makes a stop at a pharmacy on Pennsylvania Avenue. The 1875 pharmacy is an alchemy laboratory, with colorful glass bottles and strong odors of herbs and chemicals. Elizabeth purchases a small bottle of laudanum, a mixture of opium and alcohol sold as an elixir for all ailments, from headaches to female nerves. In 1875, opium addiction is a silent epidemic among elite women, a socially acceptable way to escape the physical and emotional discomfort of their restrictive lives. The pharmacist, a man with wire-rimmed glasses and a stained apron, records the purchase in a ledger without questioning the use or frequency. Modern medicine, with its antibiotics and understanding of asepsis, is still decades away. The Harrison family, with all their wealth and status, is as vulnerable to a bacterial infection as the poorest street sweeper. A simple cold can escalate into pneumonia, a cut can lead to gangrene, and a fever can be the harbinger of a swift and painful death. The opulence of the mansion, with its expensive furniture and French silks, is a paper armor against an invisible and merciless nature that can bring down the wealthiest man in the capital in a matter of days. With every step, life in 1875 is a constant dance with danger, a brutal reminder of the fragility of human existence. At 5:30 in the afternoon, twilight begins to paint the Washington sky with shades of orange and purple, but the beauty is obscured by the smoke rising from the city's thousands of chimneys. The air, already heavy with humidity and dust, acquires an acrid smell of burnt coal. It is the signal for the gas lamp lighters to begin their rounds. Men with long metal poles walk the streets, igniting one by one the lamps that dot the sidewalks. The sound of the ignition click and the soft hiss of the gas are the only sounds that break the silence beginning to fall over the Capitol. The yellowish flickering light of the gas lamps creates long, dancing shadows, transforming the streets into an almost theatrical, yet dangerous, setting. Dark alleys become havens for thieves and the homeless, and personal safety is a constant concern for anyone venturing out at night. Carriages now move faster, their horses' hooves clattering urgently on the pavement, as coachmen rush their passengers to dinners and social events. In the Harrison mansion, the bustle is palpable. Servants rush to light the gas fixtures in every room, and the smell of kerosene and gas mingles with the scent of fresh roses adorning the crystal vases. Elizabeth and Clara prepare for the gala dinner. The dressing ritual is even more elaborate than in the morning. Elizabeth dons a midnight blue silk ball gown, embroidered with beads and lace, which weighs even more than her day attire. The corset is tightened again, and she feels the pressure on her chest, a sensation that has become an intrinsic part of her existence. Her hair is styled into an elaborate chignon, adorned with family jewels. Clara, in turn, wears a simpler but equally elegant emerald green silk gown, a sign of her youth and her unmarried status. Her jewelry is minimal, but Elizabeth wears a pearl necklace and diamond earrings that sparkle under the flickering gaslight. The preparation for the evening is a performance, an act of transformation that elevates them from ordinary women to icons of elegance and power. The gala dinner is the pinnacle of the social day. The dining room is illuminated by a crystal chandelier that reflects the flames of the gas jets, creating a shimmering glow over the table. The table itself is a spectacle of opulence. Damask linen tablecloths, silverware polished to mirror-like brilliance, Limoges, porcelain, and cut crystal goblets. The menu is a 9-course marathon, a demonstration of wealth and status. It begins with fresh oysters, followed by turtle soup, baked fish, a venison roast, stuffed fowl, butter-cooked vegetables, a sorbet to cleanse the palate, elaborate puddings, and finally, fresh fruits and cheeses. French wines and champagne flow freely, and the conversation is a mix of politics, social gossip, and discussions about the latest scientific advancements. Arthur observes his guests, assessing their alliances and intentions. Between bites of venison, they discuss the gold standard, the monetary policy shaping the country's economic future. Etiquette dictates every movement of the fork and knife, every sip of wine, every word uttered. Dinner is not just a meal. It is a social battlefield where reputations are made and unmade, and where power is exercised subtly and relentlessly. After dinner, the family and their guests head to the National Theater. The street is darker now, and the sound of horse hooves echoes off the buildings. The interior of the theater is a marvel of the heiress engineering. The air is almost solid, saturated with the smell of perfume, sweat, and, inevitably, gas leaks. The stage is illuminated by limelight, a bright, intense light produced by burning quicklime in an oxygen-hydrogen flame. It is a revolutionary technology, but also volatile and dangerous, capable of turning the theater into a funeral pyre in a matter of minutes. The play is a popular melodrama, with actors gesturing dramatically and voices projected to reach the last rows of the gallery. The audience, a mix of elite and middle class, reacts with applause and gasps, immersed in the narrative. For many, the theater is the primary form of entertainment, an escape from the harsh and often monotonous reality of daily life. Arthur and Elizabeth watch the play, but their thoughts are elsewhere, on the complexities of politics and the social obligations that await them the next day. The return home occurs under the almost absolute silence of a city that has stopped breathing. Washington at midnight seems like a ghost town of marble and mud, where only the wind and the occasional creak of a distant carriage break the stillness. Arthur Harrison enters his study. He removes his starched collar, feeling his neck finally free from pressure. He lights his last candle, the small flame flickering in the darkness. He sits at his desk and opens his leather-bound diary. With a quill pen, he writes, his elegant and precise handwriting, another day of progress. At a cost few would understand. The city advances, but the human soul remains in its eternal struggle. He extinguishes the candle. The smell of kerosene and burnt wick is the sensory epilogue of the day. A reminder that, even in the era of gaslight, darkness still prevails. As the last kerosene lamp goes out in the Harrison mansion, what remains of 1875 are not just memories, but the foundations of our own world. These 24 hours were a testament to human resilience in a world that was, at once, exquisite and brutal. The Harrison family, with their rituals, their ambitions, and their fears, has vanished into the folds of time. Their silk dresses have been eaten by moths. Their voices have been silenced by the wind blowing from the Potomac. But if you walk through Lafayette Square today and close your eyes, you might still hear the echo of horse hooves against the brick, the hiss of gas lamps, and the whispers of power that shaped a nation. We are the heirs of their secrets, their struggles, and their victories. And as we look back, we realize that, although technology changes and cities transform, the human heart of 1875 with its fears and hopes, its joys, and its sorrows beats exactly like ours. History is not just a record of the past. It is a mirror that reflects who we are and who we can become. If you enjoyed this journey through time, don't forget to follow the channel for more fascinating stories.